Everyone, how's it going? Welcome back to the weekly watchlist video brought to you by DView. That's a platform that is my daily driver for charting, screening, alerts, watchlist management, all of that, and soon to be much more, including journaling and trade analytics. So go ahead and check out the link down below in the description and popping up right now if you're interested in this software. I highly recommend it. And with that, so let's go ahead and dive right in to my wider weekly list for next week. So first things first, you can see the industry groups here that I've got picked out. A lot of packaged software, medical specialties, a big name that I saw. Pharmaceutical companies in general continue to be strong. I didn't see too many kind of set up for this week, which is why I'm not including them, but definitely an area that I'm interested in. In addition, I think I've got only one precious metal stock here, GOLD. That group is definitely strong, obviously given the macro tailwinds at this point. So definitely an area to watch if you're interested in those type of names. But for now, let's go ahead and dive right in more specifically to each of these charts and what I'm watching for next week. So Airbnb, you can see, has earnings on May 9th. So definitely something to keep in mind of. I'll just kind of watch how it acts versus that level. I love to see a power gap on huge volume. That would be an indication that institutions are jumping in. It's actually opened this up a little bit more. So you can see more of the chart. This is a push off the bottom. Nice volume on the last earnings. It didn't quite go. The market kind of held it back a little bit, but we'll have to see whether this can push higher. And opening up the earnings, you can see really nice growth expected. A little bit of slowdown in terms of earnings growth, but revenue growth remains solid. And they just came up with a kind of new facet of their business, I think it's called Airbnb Rooms. So that's definitely a potential end factor involved with this name. But nevertheless, watching how it acts versus earnings. AXON, you can see, also has earnings coming up on May 9th, and I really like this flag feature here in DView that lets you know whether you should go ahead and check the company website to get more detail about earnings, because you always want to confirm these because they're such important dates. But you can see AXON also reporting on 9th of May, and I'll be watching how it acts here. You've got a potential pivot right above this high. It tried to go here on this day, got pushed lower, but it was just a pullback to the 21 EMA and 50 SMA. And I like this trend above a rising 50 and 200-day moving average in this name. So I'm watching for a push through on volume on earnings, and we'll have to see how it acts at that point. CELH, definitely want to watch up the right-hand side of this base. In the very short term, if there's an inside day and then a push higher, that could be actionable. Ideally, you get a drift lower, let that 21 EMA kind of catch up to price. And, that would be ideal, 1-2 weeks of rest, then a nice clear pivot to form, and then a push higher. We'll see if it gives us that, but really nice growth in terms of earnings, sales, margins. And this is really what's kind of unique about DView is the granularity of the earnings estimates that you get to see. You can see so many quarters in advance. I like to focus on the recent quarters, and you can see that there's acceleration expected in terms of EPS here between this quarter, this one, and this one. That's why we've got this thick blue bar underneath that, kind of emphasizing that. So it's kind of a quick and easy way to identify and notice and emphasize earnings acceleration or sales acceleration if that trend is in place. So I really like that handy feature, but definitely a name to watch. The overall group has been very strong. If you bring up Pepsi, if you bring up Monster, those have been in really strong trends. This is kind of the younger kind of growth stock in that area, and we'll have to see what happens. It definitely is a little bit of a choppy mover, but can definitely trend. This is one of my better stocks way back in the good old days of 2020. I made a few nice trades in here, but we'll have to see whether it can recover and continue to make strong moves. I think the earnings and sales runway is there, but we'll have to see, of course, whether the price action suits that and gives us a proper setup. Definitely was actionable Friday. This was an open equals low bar here. You can see the low and the open were 100.82. That's definitely a sign of strength, but we'll have to see what happens going forward. And ideally, we get a changing character and it trades a little bit tighter, but you can see how whippy it is back in this area with a lot of gap ups and gap downs. Moving on, we've got CMG, obviously an older name, but just pushing through a longer term consolidation. You can see nice earnings and sales growth expected. Really strong earnings move, finishing in the top of that day's range. Now it's kind of gone sideways a bit, pulling back in towards that HVC. So you could buy, a pullback, undercut and rally of that key level, or just if it pushes off that level on volume after it's been pulling back on a declining volume, that could be actionable as well. But nevertheless, definitely a stock to watch. I personally am a big fan of Chipotle, probably my favorite kind of fast food place. And definitely a name to watch, and it has been. If you just go to let's go a weekly time frame, it has been a pretty strong performer in the past. Going back to a daily and moving on to CRM, another kind of more mature company moving off the bottom of this longer term consolidation. Nice clear pivot right near the 200 level, kind of forming a little bit of a tightening coil here above the 21 EMA, rising 50 and rising 200 day. So definitely a spot to watch right near 200. DKNG, a fresh breakout into a new stage 2 uptrend, potentially not the largest volume here on this breakout. You can see larger spikes back in here, but I'd love to see volume continue to pick up and have constructive price and volume characteristics such as move ups on higher volume, pullbacks being shallow, and tight price action on lower volume, and then we could potentially start a new trend higher. But really nice action so far. A decent close after a little bit of a shakeout here on earnings day, and you could watch that HVC level. And obviously, you definitely want to manage risk tightly using an intraday higher low. Moving on, we've got CXAI, which is definitely the most speculative name on this list, and I'll primarily be watching this one. We'll have to see whether it can push higher, but this is kind of the lowest volume day and tightest daily range since this strong move up. So this could explode or implode. So definitely be aware of that. It's also held 10 these past 3 days. So we'll have to see what happens. And you've got this downward trend line, and we'll have to see what occurs with this name. This has been a theme that's been very strong, but I figured I'd throw this in for any day traders watching who like to play these type of highly volatile movers. I'm sure there's a few of you watching, and we'll have to see what happens. I'll just kind of be enjoying this from the sidelines pretty much, and taking a look at the chart in retrospect. Duolingo, you can see, has been one of the leaders. Very strong action from that highest volume edge. Nice gap up here. Follow through above the 21 EMA. We did break down on this day, which gives me a little bit of pause. But if we do hold this range and kind of push higher and regain this pivot, I think it's fine. We'll have to see what happens. Eventually, it's below a 50 SMA. It's below a declining 21 EMA. So this needs kind of the most time of names on this list. I love to see constructive price action and then a clear pivot form breaking through here in conjunction with the market and group acting well. And that would suggest that it's fine to test this name. I like the story. I like the growth expectation here in terms of earnings, sales. You can see acceleration is expected in terms of earnings for, it looks like, almost 4 quarters in a row. It's still negative here, so it's just kind of improving earnings, but then it is supposed to be just getting profitable eventually. Sales growth is is expected to continue, so that's good, but we'll have to see what happens with the price action. First and foremost, that's the most important thing. As Brian Shannon likes to say, only price pays. So I'll have to see whether a new setup develops with this name. And this is the kind of key level I'm watching, this previous high, as well as respect here on this day, and then a push through. And we'll see if we can pop through here and eventually regain that key level. FCNCA, a nice gap up, now holding that 21 EMA, pulling back here. Maybe I'd like a tight day, tight inside day, and then a push through this level. You could use an inside day and up as kind of an early entry setup if that does occur. But this is kind of the key pivot I'm watching right near 1,017. Gold, I figured I'd have some representation of this strong group here on this list. We had a push up, a failed breakout, but then a nice upside reversal bar, reversal bar here on Friday. So watching for follow through here through this pivot as well. FNV is another name that looks pretty good, and I had that on my list I think last week. So definitely keep an eye on this group, because this will give you a sense of how interest rates are affecting things, and we'll have to see what happens with GOLD. Moving on, we've got HIMS, another name that's reporting earnings, and you can see that these are also reporting earnings on the 9th and 10th, so keep an eye on these. There's a really handy feature here in Deep View. HIMS is the 8th, and we're in a nice strong trend. We had a consolidation, pushed higher. This would have been a really nice buy point. This is actually on Ross's top 10 report here. Nice breakout on volume, and now we're kind of stuttering right at the edge of this prior base, so it's kind of waiting for earnings for a reaction. Ideally, we get a shakeout. Maybe it gives you an opportunity at the 21 EMA, a strong close before earnings, give you a little bit of cushion going into it, but we'll have to see what happens, and most likely you'll just have to wait for the reaction after the EPS report. Moving on to INSP, a lot of medical services stocks are acting quite well. This is, right at the top of a large base. That's why I like it. I also like the earnings growth expectation, and also the sales growth in conjunction with that. And the price action is pretty strong within the shorter term base, within the longer term one. And we'll have to see whether it can push through this base, this pivot right near 277, 278 on volume, and continue the strong action. I love an inside day before it really tries to go. Give that a little bit more time to kind of deal with this gap up, and then rest a little bit, compress a little bit, and then a push through on volume. That would be optimal. ISRG in that same space, similar nice move. You've got a large gap up on earnings. Now it's kind of going quiet and tight. Really nice tight action these past 2 days. And watching for a push higher on volume. From this point, you've got lower volume as well with this tightness. And going to a short-term time frame, let's bring up a 65-minute chart. You can see that it's basing and is right at that key level. So we'll have to see what happens. It was rejected here, and we'll see if we can finally push through here on kind of the third try through that level. PACB, another biotech-related medical services company in a longer base. This is a potential start of a stage 2 uptrend if it does manage to push through this level. But a nice inside day here to end out last week, and I'm watching for a push through on volume of this key pivot. PODD already broke out, but I'm watching for a little bit of a basing versus this prior pivot, then a resumption of that trend upward, a reconfirmation upward on volume. That would be ideal, and I like to see that after a little bit of a squat here on this past Friday. RIOT, I figured I'd throw this on here, moving off the lows, compressing a little bit versus the 21 EMA. This Friday definitely would have been actionable for a potential early swing entry, but I'd like, an inside day and then another push higher, or just wait for a push through the kind of 12.11 level. You can see, not much in terms of earnings and sales growth. You've got a little bit of sales growth here, but this is mostly kind of Bitcoin and crypto related, but definitely a stock that when it goes can really show a lot of strength. Shop, I mentioned in my video yesterday, you've got a nice gap up on huge volume, exactly what you want to see. And I'm watching for a consolidation of some kind, and then, buy a pivot after it forms here, or maybe on a constructive pullback to a key potential support area, whether it's the HVC or a whole number, what have you. And we'll have to see what happens from this name. SWAV, another one which has earnings on the 8th, moving up the right-hand side of this base, forming a little bit of a handle here. You've got a pivot at around 293, and I'm watching that key level as well as how it acts versus earnings. I wouldn't mind, one more week of sideways action versus that 21 EMA, let that catch up to price. But, unless we get a shakeout on earnings, I don't think it'll catch this anytime soon, or kind of rest and let that catch up. Lastly, we've got Uber, another name showing a lot of strength after earnings, and it's right at the top of this kind of key level. Looking back here, potentially starting a new stage 2 uptrend. And you've got some nice revenue growth expectations, not super high, but about 11 to 15%. Earnings growth a little bit stronger, and then very strong in 2024. So I'm watching for a little bit more of consolidation, or just a push higher on volume. So that's a quick run through of all the names on this week's wide focus list. On Monday and every morning, I kind of narrow it down to 3 to 5 that I'm really focused on for that potential day. The most actionable setups with the highest conviction. And I really make sure I set alerts and watch those carefully in the morning for potential execution. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what your kind of top 2 or 3 names from this list are, and also any others that you're watching into next week down below in the comment section. And if you did enjoy this video, go ahead and leave a like down below. Subscribe if you're new to the channel, and I'll see you guys in future videos. Take care.